Hello, Kirk. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Sheldon. And how about yourself? Are you thawing out yet from that freeze out there in Manitoba?
It's still not freezing space. We've got another day and a bit of the minus feels like 100. But when you got a Labrador Retriever, you got to walk them. They cannot stay inside for days. Otherwise, they start eating furniture and walls and garbage and everything. So still going out. But
There is a huge, I'm hearing you twice, with about a 5-second lag between.
you got
You're
okay.
still
So why is
talking
that?
on the other leg.
Okay, I'm wondering if I've got a YouTube stream in one of my.
Hold it.
You
I
got
think
one.
that's me. Hold it. Okay, I think we're good.
Yeah, it's
was
you.
me.
Finally, it's not my
Oh,
fault.
sorry.
Finally. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, welcome everyone. That's online. We're going to be talking about pain and suffering and why does God allow that. But before we get into that, so you were away for a little bit. You had nice little trip, and now you've been back for a week and a bit.
Yeah, just over a week. I got back just in time for a massive snow dump here in southern Ontario that lasted for several days, followed by winds gusting 50 to 60 kilometers per hour, which caused all that loose snow to drift. So I don't know how many hours I spent last week or this past week blowing and shoveling. My day was 140 yards long.
So you got a football field of driveway to get rid of, and like I know for me, halfway through doing my driveway, and mine is only like, I don't know, 30 feet long.
Yeah.
By the time you're done, you look at the first part and it's like, I have to do that again.
We had a window of time.
Yeah.
So if I heard Patty would text me before she's coming home. That's my wife. And I say, give me a heads up about 1 hour. And then I'd get the text. And then I would go out there and work for about an hour, get it cleared. And I'd say, you got 45 minutes max window before that's socked in again. So make sure you're home within the next, half hour to 45.
Now, do you guys get lake effect snow there? Is
Yes,
it
a lot. Yeah.
Nasty.
A lot of it.
See, we just have just straight dry stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's usually relatively easy, but it just means that the wind can blow it easier.
Yeah.
And so
you're powdery dry like what you are out there.
Yeah.
Like I grew up in Manitoba. I know what that drifting snow is like. It gets hard. You can make igloos out of that.
Oh,
easy.
yeah.
That's what we used to do.
Yeah.
And it gets hard enough to cut and solid stuff.
Yeah, the moisture just gets pulled right out of it, and it's like ice. It's
yeah.
But we only have another 6 months of this, and then it's summer or something.
For 3 days.
You get 3 days of summer, and just long enough for the mosquitoes to come out in full force, and winter starts.
Yeah. That's part of what we have to put up with in this world is the mosquitoes, and
pain and suffering. Those little suckers are pain and suffering built in.
Yeah.
Well,
what I wanted to look at would be specifically hints that God gives us, like not just me imagining stuff, but or coming up with things, which you can do, and it's legit, but is actual hints God gives. And so I think that's what we're going to try and work through.
All right. Well, let's dig into it. I do have a slideshow. I don't know if I'll show everything on it from a current challenges to faith series that you're doing at a church. So I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, or do you want to just jump right in?
It's a series of 8 seminars I'm giving, and I've looked at what are the current challenges to Christian faith, specifically from the perspective of those who have tossed it, who've abandoned it. And so I put together 8 seminars there. Actually, I got more than that. So in Hawaii, I did 12 seminars, and even then, there wasn't enough time to cover them all. But yeah, and
well, YouTube is pretty empty. There's not much going on YouTube, so we can do a lot of these.
yeah. Well, there are similar. I've done 50 YouTube videos on these same things, which you could see if you go to the playlist called the Deconversion. I think the Deconversion playlist. There'll be about 50 of them. They won't go into the same depth as, say, you and I do, Sheldon, because we got more than 12 minutes or whatever. But if you really want to go into serious depth, even more than our live stream here, then check out my website at kirkdurston.com. Fewer articles there. I don't know what I got, maybe 50 articles on a wide variety of things. But if I need references, they'll be in the article for those of you who like to dive into this even deeper.
All right. I am going to show this intro slide because I think I'm just going to guess that these girls on this intro slide are people you know.
Yeah, they're my granddaughters, and they're around the grave of my youngest granddaughter. Her name was Anastasia, perfectly healthy little girl, just died 2 days before delivery, and they think it was a cord problem. And so this is just, I mean, I would take mosquitoes any day over something like this. And it's kind of stuff like this that really hits you hard. And this is why I think so many people see it as a huge issue. Whether which side of the fence you're on, it's a huge issue.
So getting into that a little bit, like I know we talked about it a month ago or so, but would you say that this it brought doubt to your faith, or it strengthened your faith?
Oh, it definitely strengthened my faith. I guess I have lived long enough and gone through enough that sooner or later you got to make a decision. Where are you going to stake your eternity? Where are you going to put all your chips? And I have long since put all my chips on God and eternity. And what I've experienced as a result has been so fulfilling. There's no doubt in my mind. So after she died, Anastasia, several days later, there was a funeral, and I was there. And then a few days after that, we stayed there because we just needed to be with my daughter and her husband and the girls, and just be there, to help comfort them. And so I went to church that Sunday, to the church that he's the pastor at. He's just a young pastor. I think he's about 29 years old. Just do his first church ever. And a man in the church got talking to me, gave me his condolences, and then he started talking about anger. And I was just at a loss for a few seconds, like, how did we get, just random, total new subject here. And then as he continued, I realized he assumed I was angry at God. That was his assumption. And that was the first time it even crossed my mind that people would be first time since Anastasia passed on into eternity that, wow, like I'd never even, that's true. Some people are angry at God. Many people probably are, but not me. I was just totally confident that God knows when it's time for Anastasia and little children to go. And actually, we'll get into that here. There's an interesting passage that talks a little bit about this. So no anger, no shaking of the faith. In fact, I'm stronger now. Every one of my loved ones that dies and passes in to be with God, I feel more at home there than I do here in this world, just one step at a time.
All right. So the first slide you have on here, and I'm not going to show them all, but it's the title is God Sees People Differently from Us.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of like what I was like, say, for example, Anastasia, a little baby or a toddler. There's nothing cuter than toddlers. I see some person
depending on the situation.
That's true. Little caveat there. And so when a toddler dies, wow, like they had so much potential. What a loss. We just see it all from our perspective. And I know I see it from my perspective. Like I grieve. I would have liked to see Anastasia grow up and teach her things and watch her learn new stuff. And I would have liked to do that. But I'm thinking it all from my own perspective here. But God sees people differently. He actually, it appears that he transcends time. That is, he exists in the past, present, and the future relative to us. But for God, those are all the same time, simultaneous. He's at all points in time. And so he doesn't just see a toddler. He sees that person before they were conceived. And there's no before relative to God, but relative to us. He sees them when they're a toddler, when they're a teenager, the decisions they make when they're in their 20s, in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. He sees the end of life, what they do in their senior. He sees everything that they ever think and decide and do and say. Mm-hmm. And so that's the gigantic picture. And it's with that information that God determines when is it time. For example, and there's a lot of factors that come into play there that we just don't have access to. So he sees the sum total of a person. He doesn't see. We see just the toddler. What a tragedy. God sees the whole life. And so I see the mission in life is to prepare to meet God and help others do the same. And when our mission is accomplished, it's irrelevant how old you are or how much of your so-called earthly potential you fulfilled from a human perspective. It's not relevant. It's just, are you ready to meet God? And have you carried out what your mission is in helping others to be ready to meet God too? Now you might wonder, well, like, what about the toddler who died? Or what about Anastasia, who died 2 days before her birth? How is she helping people? How does she help people get ready to know God? Well, just think about this for a half a second, and then you will see that her impact was enormous on the immediate family, on the relatives, friends of the family. That impact, who knows how far it spread, but it also has a way of making us think more of eternity. It helps me better prepare to meet God. And it helps other people maybe who haven't yet put their faith in Christ. It helps them maybe more seriously think about the afterlife and when am I going to die? And maybe I should be thinking about this.
And I think on this, it's easy as humans to say, okay, there's so much potential here. Mm-hmm. This is all the things that could have happened. This is all the dreams that we had for the person, and they weren't able to accomplish anything that we wanted. Yeah. But like we don't see the butterfly effect.
That's right.
And so it's like we don't know what could have actually been. And it could have been a way worse situation. Yeah. We don't know.
Yeah. In fact, we're going to see one of the examples where he takes a boy to spare them the pain in this world. The other thing is that we tend to think potential in this life. I can tell you that our potential and whatever we could accomplish and however amazing we might be in this life is absolutely pathetically nothing in comparison to our true eternal potential when God raises us up in a immortal, eternal, unbelievably powerful, there's just words. He says it has not even entered the heart of humanity. C.S. Lewis says, if you ever saw in this life a human at what they will be like in eternity, you just fall down and worship that creature like that, even though you're not supposed to, but there would be a strong, whoa, like, what is this? And so it's kind of like a caterpillar and a butterfly. The caterpillar has a lot of potential, could eat some more leaves, I guess, maybe poop over the side of a leaf. It's not, and we think, wow, that caterpillar got eaten too soon. It had so much potential of eating more leaves. But the butterfly is the real potential in that scenario. And it's the same with humanity. Our potential is in the resurrected state, immortal, eternal. That's where our true potential lies. But what we do in this life is preparation for one of two eternal destinies, either with God or not with God, and everything away from everything that God is.
All right. So Let's get into some Bible here. So Isaiah 26, 9 and 10.
Yeah. It says, when the earth experiences your judgments, the inhabitants of the world learn righteousness. Though the wicked is shown favor, he does not learn righteousness. And, we don't need to merely just take God's word for it here. Studies say that, well, here's an interesting one. It was the best one. It was very true and realistic. So it was done in Canada about close to 20 years ago now. And they were talking about it on TV, and the question was, do adults grow closer in or stronger in their faith to God as time goes on, or further away? And in either case, what are the main factors? And what they found is that the number one reason why some adults grew further away from God and abandoned their faith altogether was suffering and disasters and that sort of thing. Evil and suffering and disasters. That was the number one reason why those who drifted away from God did so. But they also found that was also the number one reason why people were drawn closer to God and strengthened in their faith was suffering and natural disasters and that sort of thing. But here's the difference. Approximately twice as many people, when a disaster and suffering now occurred, approximately twice as many people grew closer to God as those who grew further away. In other words, you could say for every person who drifted further from God or abandoned God because of evil and suffering and natural disasters, 2 people actually grew closer to God. So basically, you could see everybody's kind of sitting on the fence, living their lives. And from God's perspective, sitting on the fence and living your life is not a good situation. That will not wind up in eternity with God. It has to be something intentional, an intentional putting one's faith and trust in Christ for forgiveness of sin and for eternal life. So if that's not done, that's not good. And so these things happen in the world as a catalyst. There are people who don't want anything to do with God. And it might not be because of hostility. They just feel self-sufficient. I don't need God. And that is a fatal mistake. I don't need God. Well, yeah, a fungus can make it through life without relying on God. But is that all there is to life? It's a catalyst often, is it suffering? And that's what he's talking about here, is that affluent societies tend to be more self-absorbed, worried about personal rights and pleasures, climbing the corporate ladder, living for the here and now, having a good time. That's the affluent cultures. And the poor in this world, and I have seen this firsthand in working in other developing countries, they tend to be much more in touch with death, with the importance of relationships, the afterlife, and God, much more so than, let's say, the average person here in Canada or in the United States or the UK, places where I've spent a fair amount of time.
Now, a lot of that is when everything's going good, you don't need to depend on something outside of your control, right?
Yeah. And that also has to do with what people think the purpose of life is.
Right.
So a big study was done in the US for university students, the bulk of whom were not Christians. Almost none of them were Christian. And the question was, if God existed, and most of them didn't believe he was, it was largely done amongst atheists and agnostic university students. If God existed, what would be the purpose of God? The number one answer was to make us happy. So if that's your view of God, when things are going wonderful and good and you're not even religious, well, why would you need God? You're already happy and you got all this stuff, good stuff happening. But it's when things are not going good that then you say, maybe I need God. But at that point, it still might be, I need God to be happy. But I think it's much more.
Then God becomes more of a genie in a bottle.
Yeah, exactly. A genie, you rub the bottle, out pops a genie, gives you what you want. And then when you don't want the genie heads back in there again, so you can have, sow your wild oats, so to speak.
All right. So James 2:5. I'll pull it up here.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's very closely related to the other one we just discussed, where God, but the Holy Spirit speaking through the Apostle James says, "Listen, my beloved brethren, didn't God choose the poor of this world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom which he promised to those who love him?" So that's really interesting. First of all, it suggests here that the poor people in this world, the people who are not rich and affluent and flourishing and enjoying, let's say, sexual freedom with everybody and all that sort of thing, wealth and fame, power, social media, followers, the people who are enjoying all of that are actually at a disadvantage from an eternal perspective. The people who are really at an advantage in this world are those who are poor, and they're not having a good time in this world. And that's one of the reasons they start thinking there's got to be something better than this in the afterlife. This is not good. And it seems to suggest that God has chosen the poor of this world to be rich in faith and trust in him. And that doesn't mean that wealthy people can't also become children of God. And if they do, he makes it really clear that we need to be helping the poor. That's a moral obligation. It just continues on. It's stated. In fact, pure and undefiled religion, and this is in James as well, is to visit the poor and the widows in their time of need. Now, the word visit doesn't mean you just stop by and bring a coffee. No, that word implies that you are meeting their needs. So you might be tempted to say, oh, the more poor people, the more people will be with God in eternity, but that's also our obligation to help them. So there's another thing, though, as we live in a complex world of cause and effect. So every event leads to an exponentially increasing number of consequences, influencing other causal chains and so on and so forth. And most of our suffering that we occur in this world might not be because we did something bad. That's what people often think. Oh, what did he do that this is happening? No, most of the suffering might be for other reasons, and some of them that we're looking at here is that quite simply to remove the distractions of life. Many people will suddenly start valuing God in the afterlife and preparing to meet God and helping others do the same, much more than they would have otherwise.
All right. So Isaiah 57, 1 and 2.
Yeah. And this is hard, when a good man, if you've lived long enough, you will have known good people, really good people who died young, and you say, wow, like, why do the wicked live to 95 and the good die young? Now, that's, of course, not true. There's lots of wicked people who die young, and there's lots of good people who live old. But in this passage here, it says, and I quote, "The righteous man perishes, and no man takes it to heart. And devout men are taken away." Well, no one understands. For the righteous man is taken away from evil. He enters into peace. So he's talking about two different ways to die if you're a good person. One is you die and nobody could care. They could care less that you're gone. You weren't really, they were living their own lives. They were affluent. They were prospering. They were famous and powerful, and they couldn't care less if this good person over here died because they just thought, well, he's going nowhere. He's not climbing the corporate ladder or whatever. But the other one is that, and so when that person dies, God says, you're taken away from evil. From that world that never cared for you, you're taken out of that into a world where God cares for you beyond your ability to conceive. And then other people will die, and he was loved and cherished by a lot of people and greatly respected. And it says, in that case, nobody understands. What in the world? Why that guy dying? And so, again, God will do peace. Remember, the mission in life is to prepare to meet God and help others do the same. That's our mission. That doesn't mean, it's not why you exist, because that mission is only valid for as long as we're in this mortal world. Why we exist, Jesus made that very crystal clear when he says, the great and foremost command is to love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. But in the meantime, here we are in this world, and sometimes God will take a good person out of this world And the impact again when they leave. I've known some really good people. I've known one girl, she was, I think, 15 when she died, a really good person, greatly respected and liked in her high school. But when she died, it caused an impact in her high school. And many more young people began to think about God and eternity as a result, because they all knew she was a young woman with a very strong faith. So, yeah, the problem is we're left grieving their parting, but, God doesn't make a person stay in this world just because somebody's going to miss them when they're gone. Rather, we all have to deal with that. And actually, I would have to say, all the losses and the grief and the pain and suffering I've experienced in this world, as much as I really did not like it at all, they've all made me a better person. I can't think of a single example in my life where I suffered, where I turned out to be worse as a result. But that can happen. It really depends whether you're aimed in the direction of God or away from Him.
And I know a lot of people would be saying, but it's not fair. And so, like, why do good people endure suffering, or why are they taken away early, or whatever? That's not fair, because these people that are bad get to stay. And it's like, okay, but not fair for who?
Yeah.
Because if Anastasia's in heaven with Jesus, she's in a much better place.
Oh, way. Yeah. I mean, I think when we say it's not fair, and like you said, Sheldon, we got to say fair for who? I mean, yeah, we're left behind. We're here in this world. There's a huge empty hole. Is it fair that we face this empty hole? Well, if it's going to make me a better person, a more thoughtful person, a deeper person, as much as I would like to say, I don't want that, I actually might need it. But for Anastasia, for example, or for that good person that he's talking about here, I think we just get desensitized to what's going on in this world. We get desensitized to all the pain and the suffering that goes on all around us all the time, and what's going on in politics and between nations. And we just get desensitized, and we get used to it. We can live in it. And we have no idea what it's like not to be taken out of this world into a place where it's over. That pain and suffering is gone. You will never experience it again if you have eternal life. And now you're going to enter a world where that'll never happen again. And the whole point of this world is to make sure that whatever needs to be in place such that it will never happen again does transpire. God's plan is fulfilled. And so not fair. I mean, it would not be fair to keep me in this world longer than what I need to be. It would not be fair to me. Now, there's my loved ones, and I actually, I'd hope that my wife passes before me so she wouldn't have to endure that empty hole that I would leave behind. But God knows.
So we're going to 1 Kings 14. Let me know if we're going pretty slow here. So what do we got here? A few of these if we need to, but
I can just speed her up too. I don't have to spend as much time. But here's the case where a little boy got sick. Now his dad happened to be the king of the northern kingdom of Israel, around roughly about 900 years before the time of Christ. So 900 years before the time of Christ, Israel was divided into two sections. Southern kingdom was Judea, and the northern kingdom was called Israel. And he was a very wicked man and just horrible. And all his children, except for one, were horribly wicked, except for this little boy. So the boy gets sick, and the king sends, go see this prophet, find out if he's going to get better. The woman goes to see the prophet, and the prophet says, well, let me tell you. And then he talks about all the horrible things that basically that king is going to be destroyed, and all of his offspring are going to be destroyed, and it's not going to be pleasant. And then he says to the woman, when your feet enter the city, your little boy will die. And you're sitting here just saying, wow, that is just brutal. But he doesn't stop there. He says, all Israel will mourn for him and bury him. And then the punchline, for he alone are of Jeroboam's family, Jeroboam is the wicked king, will come to the grave, because in him something good was found toward the Lord God of Israel. So this little boy, his mission in life is over. God has decided it's time to take him out of this horrible situation. And from the perspective of the mother, of course, it's agony. But from the perspective of the little boy, no, it's the best thing that could possibly happen to him. And I know it's hard for us to understand that, because we always look at it from our perspective. And I would have to say that when it comes to the death of a child, it would be, I don't want to stand in the way of what's best for that child from God's perspective. So this is one example, a little hint God gives us.
All right, Galatians 6, 7 to 9.
Yeah. Well, we all tend to think that something bad happens to somebody, they must have messed up or did something wrong. And most of the time that might not be the case, but sometimes it is. And this is an example of where it is. It says this. God says through the Apostle Paul, he says, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, this he will also reap. For the one who sows to his own flesh will from the flesh reap corruption. But the one who sows to the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. Let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we do not go weary. So there's two things to note here. One is that, yes, there are, in fact, the moral law. I've heard people say, why should we obey these moral laws about stealing and murdering and having sex with animals or your neighbor's wife or whatever? Why should we obey that? They were made up by a bunch of sheep and goat herders thousands of years ago. And that, of course, is a huge assumption on their part. Because when you actually look at these and look at the data rising into the social sciences, you will find that these laws are actually, if followed, actually are designed to minimize human suffering and maximize human flourishing. But if you break the law, the very law that's supposed to protect you from suffering, undue or extra suffering and pain, well, then there are the consequences that law was set up to protect you from. And for example, I attended a seminar at a public school by a healthcare worker who serviced the university students at the University of Waterloo and over Laurier. And during her presentation, she just constantly talked about sexually transmitted diseases. And it just seemed like, wow, how many, this must be a huge problem at the university. So during the Q&A, I says, you just mentioned this so much, like what percentage of university students at this university are infected with sexually transmitted diseases? And she said, without batting an eye, she said very, very conservatively, at least 50%, at least. And that is a very conservative figure. And these sexually transmitted diseases have their own brands of pain and suffering. And some of them lead to cervical cancer and so forth, that premature death. And so the moral law, let's say, for example, with regard to sexual restraints on our sexuality, were designed to minimize human suffering and actually maximize flourishing. Let's say the love that can exist between a wife and a husband and the family there. So that's one thing to note. There's natural consequences. It's not just, it's not necessarily punishment. God says, okay, you did this, therefore I'm going to do this to you. No, it's God put the things to protect us. We went outside the barrier and now we're on our own. But the other thing to note is it says, note the phrase lose heart, grow weary. So he's talking about to the good person who decides, no, I'm going to live within these moral values here. He says there's an implication that the reward isn't immediate. It's down the road somewhere. Later on in life, let's say the quality of your relationship with your spouse after 50 years of marriage, and how well and strong your family's doing after 50 years of marriage, or but most of it lies in eternity as well. So there's two aspects here.
All right. Number 6, Hebrews 12.
Yeah, this is interesting because it implies that those people who love God and want to live true and right lives may actually suffer more in some respects than the person who's just having a good time doing all sorts of nasty things. So it says this, "My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons." Now, you got to realize here in Greek, the word son here is being used generically, both for sons and daughters. But if you had a mixed group, you would use the masculine pronoun here. So you can't infer that he's just talking to guys here. You know, he's using it generically. But what's interesting here is that some suffering is unavoidable. We just looked at the natural consequences for being bad in the last point. But in this point here, no matter how good you are, there may be some suffering. And for example, gold, if you want to refine gold, you have to melt it and skim the impurities off. But if you want to refine it even more, then you melt it again, or you put it through a series of melts, and each time remove more of the impurities until eventually you got extremely pure gold. And this is kind of the picture that God uses sometimes. He uses the term refiner's fire. And in this life, even good people may have to have periods of the refiner's fire just to make them a better person, maybe spiritually more mature, more thoughtful, more compassionate. And as I said earlier, that the suffering that I have incurred in this life, it seems that in every case, I became more compassionate, more thoughtful, more caring. And as much as I don't want these refiners' fires, I have to grant that they have been a positive influence in my life. And so people would say, "Oh, look at that guy over there. He's a real man of faith," or "that woman over there just loves God. And look, she had to suffer over here and do well." That may be the case. God's suggesting here that in some respects you may suffer as a way of refining you to become a more pure of heart person.
The thief on the cross.
Yeah. So now this is something where the thief on the cross, in the final minutes of life, hours of life, they both started off cursing Christ or mocking him. We're told in one of the Gospels. But sometime during those hours they hung there, one of the thieves was touched. He could see this Jesus here, this man should not be hanging on a cross. And he came to faith right there in the final hours of his life. And he asked Jesus to remember him. And Jesus says, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." And the point here is that sometimes you ask, why this suffering as you approach death? Now in Canada, we have the option of MAID. It's called medical assistance in dying. It's really, the doctor will help euthanize you or help you end your life. And I know people who have done that, but in doing that one woman I'm thinking of right offhand, she had maybe 2 years of life left, but she anticipated the quality of life will really start going downhill. She doesn't want that. She wants to have control over when she ends and have a good quality of life right up. So she chose that method, and that was it for her. But there's other people that I've known. I remember one of my wife's relatives. He suffered a long, slow decline from cancer, and I went to see him. Patty and I went to see him in his final day of life, it turned out. And I wanted to talk to him about spiritual things, but there were a lot of his friends in the room, and they were laughing and joking and trying to cheer him up about, all the good times we had. And one guy says, "I found your stash of booze in the house," and then, they all laugh. Excuse me. But then, and I wanted to talk about important stuff, but So I sat to one side for about an hour. Finally, they all left. And he didn't know we were still in the room because we were kind of back sitting in an easy chair. And as soon as they all walked out of the room, there was silence. And I just prayed silently, God, help me know what to say. But even as I prayed, this poor man who was just laying in his bed staring at the ceiling, he started crying and he says, why were they talking about these things? I wanted to talk about God, he just said out loud. Well, as soon as I heard that, both my wife and I went over and I read him one of us read him the 23rd Psalm. I explained about the Good Shepherd and that Jesus will carry you through the valley of the shadow of death if you put your complete trust. Oh, he wanted that so bad, it wasn't even funny. And so I says, well, let's pray. And I started praying and I only got 15 seconds into my prayer and he just interrupted and he started praying. And if you want to hear somebody praying very sincerely, it's somebody praying that's on the final hours of life. In fact, when he finished, there was a total look of absolute peace on his face. And it looked like he fell asleep. So we tiptoed out of the room and he died the next day. But that prayer that he prayed was his last moments of lucidity. He lapsed into unconsciousness sometime after that, never regained lucidity and passed away. So here's my point. Sometimes there is a process that goes on between you and God. Even if your brain doesn't even work anymore, the brain, the physical brain is, maybe you've got dementia, but between the mind and God, the soul and God, who knows what goes on there, but sometimes it's exactly what is needed to bring a person to do the final preparations to meet God is at that point. So sometimes that's why God, will allow this. And you say, wow, that's brutal. But I have to say that if that's what it took for me, and I realized I could go down that same road, could be, and I've decided, well, if that's what God's going to permit, it must be for some good purpose. And therefore I'm committed to come what may to do that.
And then you share this.
Comfort and encouragement. This is something like when someone passes on and the friends and relatives come, often it's best not to really be saying a whole lot, just be with the person. But if that person who's suffered the loss knows that some of the family and friends have also suffered the same kind of loss that they can identify, they know what it's like, then, or even if they haven't identified, but they come because they deeply care, that can help. And so what I'm suggesting is that there is someone who can be with you day and night through those times of suffering. And that's the Good Shepherd, the one who will pick you up and carry you through the darkest hours of your life. And there's been times in my life where I just say, God, help me make it through this day, because I am so torn up with grief and sorrow that I just need, God help me. Like, pick me up, carry me, help me breathe, because it's even hard to breathe sometimes if you're grieving. It's really a powerful grief. And so Jesus said, even though, in the 23rd Psalm, it says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And so that's one aspect of things, that he will be with you when you suffer. But there's another aspect in, the next slide shows my daughter and the family, and it shows her holding her child. And I just got to regain my composure here slightly. But there's something I learned, and it has to do with that passage, the shortest verse in the Bible, when it says Jesus wept. So when it says Jesus saw Lazarus' sister weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, and it says he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled, and he said, where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. And these guys are just torn up, just, the sister and Jesus. And then it says Jesus wept. And I just thought, well, he's going to raise him back to life in a few minutes, so he can't be weeping because of Lazarus is gone now. So he must be weeping because he was torn with compassion for those who were deeply grieving and suffering. And I never really understood that until at the funeral. What tore me up the most was not the loss of my granddaughter, but witnessing the agony of grief in my daughter. And there was nothing I could do to make it go away. You see, a father wants to protect the daughter, that wants to make it good, help her out, but she's got to walk this road. She's got to grieve, and she did it well, mind you. Her faith grew stronger, but that doesn't mean there wasn't just agony that she was suffering. And that was harder for me than the loss of my granddaughter, was watching someone I deeply love, and I wanted to comfort her, but she was torn up. And I think when I saw that, when I experienced that, there were times at the funeral I couldn't even look at my daughter because I would just lose it. So as a result of that, I began to understand why Jesus wept. And it showed the depth of his heart and his compassion and his love for people. It tears his heart for when we grieve too. He's not just a God out there who's never, he was kind of immune from all of that. No, he was here. He walked among us as a human being. He knows what it's like. And that can help you, each one of us, when we're walking through that horrible grief, to know that he's probably grieving as much, if not more so. And he's not just grieving. He's not so much grieving the loss. It's time for that person to go, but he's grieving for what we have to go through. And I find that helps.
C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, well, C.S. Lewis lost his wife, and if you read his book, and I highly recommend it, it's called what's it called? Grief. Yes, A Grief Observed. You start reading that book, it's kind of like a journal. It's kind of like he's just journaling. And as you read this, you can see, wow, this guy is just trying to make it through the day. Just trying to make it through the day and then the week. It's real. It's raw. But as he begins to recover, or he begins to climb out of that grief, he writes this. He says, "When I lay these questions before God, I get no answer, but a rather special sort of no answer. It is not the locked door. It is more like a silent, certainly not uncompassionate gaze, as though he shook his head not in refusal, but waving the question like, 'Peace. Child, you don't understand. Heaven will solve our problems, but not, I think, by showing us subtle reconciliations between all our apparently contradictory notions. The notions will all be knocked from under our feet. We shall see that there never was any problem.'" And so I think he's onto something here. I've just had a distant taste of what it's like in eternity, just in a world where that and then we have a very different perspective. We see, well, this all had to be. It actually wasn't a problem after all. And we'll see, instead of seeing through a mirror darkly, or glass darkly, as he puts it in 1 Corinthians, we will see the real. We'll see how it all ends. So yeah. So what I'm suggesting through all of this is we could not possibly have a better shepherd who will take care of us, because he transcends time. He knew you before the creation of the world relative to us, and he loves you beyond your ability to even wrap your mind around. And he will pick you up and carry you in his arms during those times in your life when you are so devastated that it's hard to even take the next breath. But you must be willing to make that big step of faith. Put your faith in him, no terms, no conditions, nothing held back. And just total, it's like marriage, all in, 100%. 100%. And if you do that, then it's not going to be necessarily easy. There will be the discipline, the refiner's fire. There'll be the grief we have to go through. But in the end, we won't even, In fact, one of my favorite passages here, yes, it's the very next slide. It was, our life would be like a dream we can no longer remember. It's kind of like when you had a dream last night and you can't remember a thing about it, and then you're not even sure you had the dream. And that's kind of like what it'll be like. And I get that from a description of eternity that he gives in Isaiah chapter 65. And this is just quoting part of it. The part that I didn't put in here, he says, look, I'm going to create a new heaven and a new earth, and then the former things will not be remembered or come to mind. You might think, oh, I want to remember a lot of the good times we had here. Let me tell you, the best time you could have here, except for maybe one exception, and that exception is where true love is involved. Because true love, I think, is divine. It's a divine gift. Say, my love for my spouse will continue through into eternity because it's a divine thing. But everything else that happened here, even maybe what we did, all these, what this world was like, I don't want anything to do with it. Because I remember those few seconds of what it was like to not remember a thing about this life, and it was the most wonderful feeling. It's like you've been tortured, something horrible happened, and you don't remember what it was, but it's over. And there's just this huge, huge feeling. Now, I don't think that happens from my reading of the scriptures until the new heaven and new earth is created. So there is a period of time after you die until that new heaven and earth is created, even after the resurrection, where there's some sort of a final judgment day for every living soul that ever existed. But when that's all done, a new heaven and earth is created, and it's this world he talks about in Isaiah, where you won't remember a thing about this world except the loved ones that have also come with you into eternity. That love, which began here, will continue, I think. That's my... And then Revelation, last book of the Bible, he says, they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them. That idea of being among them is like when Jesus was here on earth in a human form. He actually could sit there and eat fish, drink coffee, well, probably not coffee, but tea at least, and have good times. And he says, if you open the door, I'm knocking. If you open the door, I will come in and dine with you and you with me. And there's this idea of good fellowship times that we all have experienced, hopefully, where your friends come over and it's just a great time. But in eternity, he will be in the full divine glory, but he says we will be like him in glory as well. So again, we'll be able to be with him, but this time without the obstacles of human frailty and immortality. And he says, I'll wipe away every tear. There will no longer be any death, no longer any mourning or crying or pain. And you know, even a lot of my memories of what I've seen in this world, what I've endured, those memories themselves, they don't exactly make me feel wonderful. And he says, those will be gone. There'll be nothing to cause you pain. The things in this world will no longer be remembered or come to mind.
Well, Serpa, thanks for commenting. June 1st will be 9 years since my husband passed away suddenly. Mm-hmm. I was never angry with God, but thankful for his presence and comfort through my grief. Grief visits me, but I don't live there. I choose joy.
Thank you, Serpa. That's so encouraging to me. I just love to see other people who belong to God, who've walked that road, and say what you've just said. That's encouraging.
Yeah. And I find that what she says here, grief visits me, but I don't live there.
I like that. That's excellent. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you all for watching, and don't forget you can still comment and chat after as we finish off here. This we do love to hear from you. So if you have a topic or anything you want us to discuss, or you have a complaint with something we've said, feel free, engage with us in the comments, and then you can also head over to kirkdurston.com. And if you want to talk to him, read his content, it's all there. And don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that bell, and you'll get notified when we have another live stream coming up. I think we're on for next week.
Yeah, I think so.
Then I'm off for 2. So.
Okay. Well, we better have a good one next week then.
So yeah. So maybe we'll get into some science or talk about asteroids
Who
or
knows?
something again.
Yep.
We'll see. And
There's one scheduled to maybe hit Earth, but not till
I think
Christmas.
they downgraded it a little bit again, but
they upgraded it yesterday to
There are 3.
1 chance in 3, but so did they downgrade it again?
Maybe it's a different asteroid. There's a few out there that are
okay,
causing issues, but
yeah,
we have to
find
find those actors with the nuclear bomb that can go and move it or something like that.
Yeah. Use them for something useful.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will see you later. And
bye for now.
See you later.